Hello, so I'm Ashleigh Grange, and welcome to this episode of Wellness Begins Within. I have the absolute pleasure of having Laura Weisz with me today, and Laura Weisz is such a cool human, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you about her. And I wanted to give you just a little summary of a little bit of her background and maybe to kind of color or influence how this conversation is going to go. And so Laura Weisz is a medical intuitive and a psychic medium who weaves together intuitive insight, grounded presence, and deep care to support people through their own healing journeys. She has trained in mediumship, Reiki, medical intuition, and more. And she draws inspiration from Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, and Western herbalism, which is quite a beautiful summary of some of your gifts.
Thank you. Yeah, so happy to be having this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And, you and I mentioned this the last time we chatted, but I like to joke that I wish, and I'm a little bit jealous, but I wish I was one of those lucky people that had never heard of medical intuitives and that I was able to get all the relief I needed from doctors. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, it would be nice, but it's nice that you're tuned in, that you can access those kinds of alternative ways of looking at the body too, right?
Yes.
It gives you a little more
I'm
deep
glad I have the
insight.
openness, exactly the openness to it.
Yeah.
And I have had a number of medical intuitive readings in the past, and I also had the opportunity to benefit from a reading with you last week. And I have to say that I was so blown away by how accurate you were and how just really practical the information was. And I think that's sometimes a piece that's missing with medical intuitive readings that as we chatted a little bit before the show, it's like we can read the information, but it's not necessarily presented in a practical package that people can kind of take away and like really take action on it. So, do you think that's one of the things that really characteristics your work as a medical intuitive?
Yeah, it's definitely very important to me that people come away with some really practical, things that they can apply immediately, and then also things that they can kind of unpack about, emotionally about why those energies are present to begin with. And so kind of trying to weave together both pieces of like the practical information and the, energetic information in a way that's actually that can meet them where they're at immediately. I think is really, yeah, important to me for sure. Um, and I think that having, you know, my sessions are in two halves, and the first half is really, as you've experienced, it's really a lot of detailed information. It comes really quickly. I haven't have people take notes, and that's really kind of like we get through as much of the body as we can, and then the second half is kind of more of that meditative unpacking. And I really try to make sure there's enough transition between those two because they're really different experiences. But I think people often will come to me for the practical information that they get from the reading and then are kind of blown away by what surfaces through the healing and how powerful and simple that can be as well.
And it's like right from the get-go, you're giving people, practical things that they can do after the fact, but it's also like this huge bonus of healing you really at an emotional level, mental level, spiritual level that's able to kind of shed some of that, perhaps what we might call stagnant energy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Stagnant energy. And it looks a little bit different depending on what it is that we're releasing and where in the body that we're releasing it in from different organ systems. Um, but there's, several different main techniques that I use, and one of the main ones is really kind of working with past parts of self,
Mm.
when that energy got kind of embedded in, or the belief system around that energy got embedded into the tissues, and releasing that through some gentle meditations and kind of working with that part of self again and reintegrating them. And then the other part of that is I also will do kind of cord removals. Cords aren't as common, I think, as sometimes people think they are. We have positive cords a lot.
Mm.
But I I think like as far as them being very impactful, I think it's very buzzwordy now to talk about cord cutting. But I don't ever cut cords. We remove
Well,
them as part of the process. So it's really about kind of you don't want to if you just cut the energy in the middle, then you still have lots of energy on both sides, right? If you say you have a rope cut between you and you cut the rope, then two people are still holding a lot of that rope. And
ooh,
so it's more about collecting the energy and returning it to other folks. So that will come up, every I don't know, every 10 or so sessions, I think, or, it ebbs and flows, right? There'll be a chord that we need to work with. And that can be chords with people that are past or living, which is interesting when
right.
that happens. And then also sometimes there will be past life stuff that does come up within sessions. Again, that's not always as common. Um, and then sometimes, yeah, there's other energies that we need to work with. I had somebody that had kind of like almost like a generational curse, shall we say, or like the energy of a generational curse, and we worked with that as well. So just depending on where that person is at. Um, but people often say kind of immediately after sessions that they just feel really peaceful, right? It's
Mhm.
like part of this thing that's been kind of like this noise in their head that's constantly been buzzing is suddenly relieved, or like no longer there. And there's just this sense of peace and wholeness. Yeah.
Wow. And I didn't even realize that chords could be created for positive reasons. So, do you want to talk about maybe some of the life circumstances or situations that would cause either a negative chord or a positive chord to be created between two people or places? I'm assuming places too.
Yeah, it's typically mostly and commonly I'll see it between two individuals. It could be also be, an animal or a pet, right? As far as that. I mean, we have lots of chords all the time, right? There's chords to our children, to our parents, to our loved ones, our partners. And most of these are those positive, it's a two-way connection. A chord is a two-way connection that where energy is passing back and forth. And so, when you have that feeling of like, oh, I should call so and so, and then suddenly like the phone rings, right? And that's you kind of that cord between you two is pinging, right? And this
Yeah.
is, kind of goes into quantum entanglement and all of those energetic filaments and whatnot. And so those are the chords when I'm doing a session, those are not the chords that I'm looking for. I'm looking for things that feel like they're out of balance, that stand out. So most, sometimes when I do cord removals, people are concerned that they're going to lose kind of the loving parts of that relationship. And
Mm.
that's not what we're focusing on. We're looking for kind of chords that are having a negative influence where there is either kind of like energy being taken away from that person or they're taking too much energy or taking too much on from the other person and it's
Mm.
not this equal ebb and flow of energy and it's causing them some kind of harm in some way or some kind of misbalance in their system. And so, returning that energy kind of contains them. And a lot of times these chords, I think sometimes will get embedded in a person when they're very young, when they don't have
Mm.
agency over their
Mhm.
energy field. And so, especially like when it's with a parent,
Mhm.
that they don't really have a choice of whether or not they're going to get that. Sometimes even in romantic relationships that happens as well. Um, but it's always really interesting to, part of the cord removal process is that we hand the energy back to that person, or that person's like energetic self and then watch what the reaction is that that person has and that gives you a lot of information about that relationship, which is really interesting. And I've noticed that when people are past and we're working with chords with a past person, it's a much cleaner exchange. Like that person is usually like working on themselves on the other side and they're ready to receive that energy and like kind of move on from that and there's a lot more acceptance. Whereas when it's a living person, if it's a difficult relationship, sometimes that person is like there's anger or there's
Yeah.
frustration or they're like, why are you
Ego.
giving me this, or yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit more reaction from that energetic self of the other person, which is
Interesting.
again information. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
That process of them doing work on the other side is obviously making a big difference because they're able to see kind of the truth of that relationship in this lifetime, and then
mm,
whether or not they're still holding on to some of the energy once they've
yeah.
gone. That's pretty
Yeah, that's
sounds like a
right.
really powerful practice.
Yeah, and it often, I think with the past people, it often ends up feeling a little bit more like the person is kind of holding on to an idea of what that relationship was or whatever
Yes.
dynamic. And then, the other side is really ready to be like, let's
Let's rewrite.
recalibrate.
Let's rewrite this
Yeah.
soul contract. Let's make sure that
Right.
we're, cleared this dynamic. We're not still dealing with this in the future.
Yeah, they're happy to
And
do
so
that.
people might not even realize like they're coming, you're obviously looking at cords as part of their medical, part of their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. But it's
Mhm.
like, are there times when, this stagnant energy might present as something else rather than a cord?
I mean, definitely we'll see kind of when I look at different organ systems, what that stagnant energy kind of looks like. And it again depends on the person and what their guides are showing me, what the guides that
Mhm.
came in for this particular session are showing me how that presents. Some guides are going to do more visual information, some are going to do more kind of showing me exactly what the tissues look like, some are going to show like tell me a story about it, right? Or show me a relationship dynamic. Um, but it's it um I often will use the emotional map of the organ systems as kind of a guide to get a theme of like what we're working on.
Mm.
So we'll go to liver and we'll look at anger. The emotion of anger is what the liver governs. And then it's like, okay, what does anger look like for this person?
Mhm.
How do and that's how do they deal with their own anger? How do they deal with another person's anger? And those can be very different pictures. And then that kind of will talk about what that energy looks like. But it can also show up sometimes as, like it can just be like a physical ball of energy in
Yeah.
somebody's system. It could be a protective, energy around the heart. It can just be a feeling. It can show up, physically in the tissues as what that looks like. Um, and there's, millions of ways that it can show up depending on the person. There are definitely patterns that are consistent, that I learn, but um yeah, that person's like unique expression of how their heart, gives and receives
Oh.
love is going to be different.
It's like if you had to guess like what percentage of people's emotional health and well-being, like how much of an impact do you think that has on the physical body? Because some people are probably coming thinking that you're only going to talk about what's physically wrong with them, but there's this whole other emotional world that, depending on their constitution, their makeup, they may or may not be ready to explore. So how do you navigate
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I think the first part of the question is I think everything is, it's all interconnected. There's no, like, the body is not separate from the emotions. They are one thing. Recently made this diagram and it was like body, mind, soul on the triangle and then emotions in the middle of the
Mm.
triangle. And the emotions are the connection between all of these pieces of us. They're the way that is moving through. And so I I think science is just starting to get into this, like, oh, the
Mhm.
emotions are like really impactful in our bodies. Stress like really impacts us, and it's kind of like all this nervous system talk. But this is something that these ancient traditions have known for so long. Um,
And sometimes even prioritizing over the physical body, right? If
right.
you're thinking
Yeah.
about Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine, it's like they focused, and even flower essences in my own background, it's like they
Mm,
focused on the emotional state. Where the person was off from an emotional perspective would then have a physical impact on the body. So by the time we've got to the physical body, we are, knee deep in our emotional well being.
right. Yeah,
Rather than putting it
absolutely.
to a side, it's
Yeah.
like an integral part
Yeah.
of certainly reading someone's system. Like you've probably never had a reading where someone's emotional state didn't have some kind of impact on their physical health
Right.
condition.
Yes. Yeah. It's always, and I think people are, it's funny because I think when I finally bring it up, it sounds so obvious, when you say it. They're like, oh, yeah, I knew that, right? But they didn't know it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. They
In
knew
the
it
way
up
that they're
here, but they
trained.
didn't know it, yeah, in their
Right.
heart.
Yeah. And so it becomes yeah, and then they can kind of, you can see them kind of like chewing on that
Yeah.
and processing and being like, wow. Um, so it feels like to me sometimes the things I say are, they're like obvious. Sometimes I'm not always telling people things that they don't know about their body, but it's like the framework that I'm bringing it in with and the way that it relates to other aspects of their life, can really, that's where like the aha moments come in. Um, and I feel like there was a second half of that question that you asked, and
Yeah,
I'm trying to
maybe there
remember what it
was.
was.
It's
Maybe
gone
we'll
now.
pause again.
I'm sure we'll circle
That
back
was
to it.
me too. Yeah.
I well, like one thing I love about your reading was that how systematic it is. Like you go through each system in the body, and then you're like, okay, am I missing anything? Like anything that was kind of like jumping out. So you must have some kind of framework that you work with that, is not traditional or typical of most medical intuitives.
Yeah, I think when I started, I used to do a little bit more of just like, let's see what
Yeah.
surfaces, right? And I found that the good stuff wouldn't always pop up immediately with that. And so I've, started to be a lot more methodical with kind of working through all the different systems. And sometimes we run out of time and I can't get to everything. But I really try to make sure I'm pinging all of those key organ systems and then seeing kind of what else pops up. I think, some of it is coming from my training as a UX researcher. I spent a
Mhm.
decade working in
Mm.
tech as a UX researcher, and I've done sessions with hundreds of people doing user research sessions to where I'm testing digital products with a, kind of a script and methodically working through the script of, with, the general public and testing things. And I would have lots of stakeholders watching me from some pretty top tech companies. And so I'd have to be very on point. And I think that really brought me a lot of like structure around how to do these sessions, especially virtually.
Mhm.
That it feels very natural to just kind of apply the body
The
information
framework.
onto.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was, it's like all the pieces of our path, right? They seem like they don't connect. And then at some point, all the threads weave together, and you're like, oh, that's why I spent like all this time doing this thing that didn't seem like it made sense. Um, but yeah, and a lot of that is again from also my Ayurvedic training and my traditional Chinese medicine study as well. Um, and kind of being steeped in that for a while, just really like I've been thinking in that framework for a while, and then kind of now I can apply it with the intuitive information that's coming through.
It's very much like a language of the body, really.
Mhm.
That just popped into my mind. Can't imagine why. But it is the language of like how we talk about the body. So Ayurvedic
Yeah,
medicine, traditional Chinese medicine gives us a language, a framework, a way to think about the body that may be, different or the same as, people talking about the chakras, right? It's just
right.
more of a systems based way of looking at the body.
Right. Yes. And I think I have a podcast too, and I'm about to do an episode to release tomorrow that's on hot, cold, wet, dry, which is
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of the framework that I use, kind of describing with that, and that's the kind of the Ayurvedic and TCM framework of just understanding the moisture pattern and the temperature pattern gives you a lot of information to work off of and a lot of guidance for people to actually work with something that's really tangible in their life. And so, again, those are things that they're going to be like, oh, I always knew that I ran hot. Like I sweat really easily. Like these things become are not, surprising to them generally,
Yeah.
but then they're like, oh, that's unique to me,
Mhm.
and I think that's something I love about this work too, is that I think, there's so much rhetoric around nutrition and diet and
Mhm.
bodies and like
Nervous
this body is
system.
good,
Yeah.
this body is not good,
Yeah.
thinness is better than curvy, whatever. And it's like that's
Dogma,
fundamentally,
dogma more than anything,
yeah.
because it's like
Yeah.
one person has the
One
solution for all. Yeah.
one diet,
Yeah.
one just drinks celery juice forever. Like that's not um that for some people that's a great choice,
Yeah.
for other people that's not necessarily going to be in their best interest. And so learning your unique system can, and it's, you don't we're not always going to be perfect. We're not always going to eat exactly
Mhm.
to our body type, right?
Life is just too
Myself.
delicious.
There are many
Life is just
delicious
too
dairy
delicious.
things that I shouldn't eat that I eat, right? But um it gives us at least a guide, right, to be understanding these things and yeah, allowing, a structure that people can work off of that's really tangible. Um, so I really value that part of bringing in I try to bring the temperature and the moisture pattern in pretty early on, and then kind of when we get to digestion, that's when it becomes really clear, because digestion is everything. It's
Mhm.
everything in the body. It's like if your digestion is out of whack, nothing else is going to work. I see that all the time, that they keep being like, what? Well, I have this skin issue over here and I
Totally.
have this thing over here. And I'm like, that's
Always.
all related to your dryness pattern. They're all the
Always.
same energy. That's
And
all
we kind
coming
of
together.
override it sometimes, right? It's like
Yeah.
someone, they don't necessarily make the connection between the hair loss that they're experiencing and the fact that they haven't been able to digest and absorb any of the nutrients from this food that they've been eating, right? Maybe they have low stomach acid. So just kind of these simple, I mean, it seems simple once you have the answer. But up until that point, it can feel really frustrating that you're just not getting the answers. And certainly, doctors will have a very different way of looking at the Constitution than some of these ancient traditions would,
Right.
right?
Right. And I think, we a lot of things are just inflammation in Western medicine.
Yes.
They're just like, oh, this is inflammation of this particular organ system,
Yeah.
or this is, which is it that is helpful, but it's like, why is that inflammation there? Where is that inflammation? Is that a heat inflammation? Is that a cold inflammation? Is that moisture? What is the mechanism
Pattern.
behind the
Yeah.
inflammation, right? And
Mhm.
that's going to change a lot about how that's handled. Um, and then bring in the emotional piece in too, right, with that. um and that's also really interesting about the moisture and the temperature patterns, as well as those impact personality.
Oh,
Somebody that runs hot is also going to are often they're often more extroverted, they're often louder people, they're
interesting.
often like they often have more energy, they're just kind of bigger and more vibrant. And then somebody that runs cold is going to be more reserved. Somebody that has
Wow.
a dry constitution, they're going to more often have like a dry sense of humor,
Yep.
which is really interesting. um and my Ayurveda teacher used to say that you could tell somebody's body type just by how because they do tongue assessment as part
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
Ayurvedic.
Yeah.
And so she could tell immediately their type by how they present their tongue.
Wow.
So like a pitta person which is fire, would just like
Yeah.
put it right out there and be like, here's
Yeah.
my tongue. And a vata person who's, cold and dry, they'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, here's
Here.
my tongue. And then the kapha, which is earth and water, would be
Yeah.
like they just kind of like plop it out there.
Yeah.
Right. And so she'd be like, all right, I got lots of information
That's so
about what's
funny.
going on. Yeah.
And like for anyone who's ever seen an acupuncturist, they probably had to show their tongue as a part of that because they are looking at similar patterns, right? Traditional
Yeah.
Chinese medicine, acupuncture, it's like reading the body from those four different planes that you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. And and I think that those so both techniques use pulse. Typically they have different
Mhm.
ways of doing pulse, and then the tongue assessment and kind of face assessment. And
Mhm.
all of these are ways of visually checking kind of what I'm energetically checking as well, right?
Yeah.
Or like with pulse, energetically
Yeah.
kind of checking it. But it's all of these things coming together to form a full picture. And with the tongue, it's like it's a whole map of actually the body, of like where
Wow.
you're having cracks or
Yeah.
inflammation or ridges. There's like different
Colors
yeah,
and
it matches to the
coverings
organ
and
systems on the
wow.
tongue itself. Same
So
thing with
it's
the
like
liver.
quite a very specific art. It's not just kind of
Yes.
general, oh, you have a flabby tongue or oh, your tongue, has a white cast on it. It's very
Right.
you
Yeah.
can kind of
It's like
pinpoint where the problems are. Like the gallbladder is not supporting the digestive function, therefore leading to more candida or whatever,
right.
right?
It's like
Wow.
you have a crack where the liver section is on your tongue. That means you
Yeah.
have dryness within your liver, right? And
Wow.
in Ayurveda, like the pulse reading is really deep. It's like they do I believe it's 7 layers of pulse that you're reading, and each different layer is like different tissues, different organ systems, different
Wow.
the bone. And a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners don't have never learned pulse. It's like
Mhm.
it's a
Dying
not
art.
everybody teaches it.
Hmm.
Um, but it's kind of the way that it was traditionally done was all
And
these ways.
maybe
And
maybe that's
yeah,
just the level of sensitivity, right? Not every practitioner is necessarily coming with the same intuitive wisdom, the same intuitive background that you and I might, want to have as part of our practice too, right? So
yeah. And that's a lot
they're
of the
finding
training is
ways. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the subtlety of like what level you're on.
Hmm.
But for me, the chakra level was always the easiest, right?
Ah.
Because it's energy. So I'd end up doing impromptu readings for people, when I'm on the chakra level and be like, oh, you have a great relationship with your mom. I'm like, where
Yeah.
is it? This is before
Yeah.
I developed this immediate, like, where is
Yeah.
this information coming from?
Wow.
Yeah.
And but you had the trust in that moment because I think that and when I teach about intuition, it is, 90% of the work we do is about really focusing on your own self-trust and your ability to share the messages. And I remember early on that I would get some weird and wacky messages in the Akashic records, and I had a great hesitation to share them because I'm like, this is just so crazy. I can't possibly say this to the client. And I realized that if I didn't share that message, nothing else would come through. It was like the channel was literally physically blocked. My guides are like, you're not saying it. We're not giving you anything else. And so I learned really early on. I'm a fast learner. And I learned right on. I'm like, I have to say the thing. And
Yeah.
and that really helps us develop our trust because the client is either going to resonate with that information or they're going to need to shift. They're going to need to sit
Mhm.
with that information and really kind of like ponder how that, impacts them.
And I think when those times when it doesn't immediately hit and it takes them a minute, not losing the energy field
Yes.
is a big part of the development process too, of
Yes.
being able to receive a no and be like, okay, let's work with this, right?
Totally. Oh, and
Um,
ask for clarification, right?
yeah,
Asking your guides. You're going to have to give this to me in a different way so that the client can receive it, or you're going to have to kind of, change, not you're not changing the message, but you're kind of getting more in tune. You're getting more insight. You're going a little bit more specific. Like maybe the relationship is not with the brother, but it's with the half brother, right? So
yeah.
knowing, because it's the brother that's showing up, but it's like, no, no, you're dead. This is about the half brother. He's still here.
Right. And the relationship feels similar, right? So like,
Yes.
yeah, kind of honing in onto that, yeah, especially with a mediumship. But it's interesting what you're talking about with the kind of like this is the piece of information and no other, that all information stems from. It
Yes.
reminds me of when I was doing specifically a mediumship reading with a woman at a market, and she had come and she said, my son passed away and I really want to connect with him. And I was like, well, let's do a general reading first and see what else comes through. And
Mhm.
it's one of the only times that I didn't get any information. Like I was
Wow.
sitting there in front of her in the hot seat and I'm just
Yeah.
like, you know, to be
What's
like,
next?
nobody
Your
else is coming
teacher didn't
forward.
prepare me for this.
And none of their other relatives are coming forward because it
Yeah.
was like the son is the one that needs to talk. She needs to connect with her son and you have limited time. And as soon as I brought him forward, I was like, all right, let's focus on him. And like immediately all this stuff comes through,
Wow.
about that was really specific. And so, spirit's very wise. They know
Yes.
what they're doing and they're all working on the other side to make things happen the way they should. And it's like you talk about trusting yourself, but it's also like learning to trust those energies
Yes.
that they have your back and that they're gonna show up is a whole other like
And the
thing. And then
client gets what
yeah,
they need, most importantly, right? Like you're showing up to
right.
work every day knowing that whatever comes through is meant for the client's highest and best good, whatever that looks like for them. It might not be, what you might consider the highest and best good, but we have no, you know, in the ideal in most case scenario, it's like we don't have any personal attachment to any of the
Yeah.
information. We don't know this person
And
generally.
it's none of our business, right? In
Exactly.
its own way, right? And it's like, and that trust of like that you're never going to know how much this impacted somebody, but just
Yes.
trusting that it was the right thing at the right time, at the right level they were at, is
That's
a big part
that's
of it.
that's a writer downer. That's one of those pieces that it's true. We will not know the full impact of how maybe that changed their healing journey, how that gave them peace, how it gave them, the information they needed to take the next step, or maybe they've been struggling with something, or maybe you just kind of reaffirmed what they already knew, but
Yeah.
knowing that that's the most important thing for them in the moment, because that's the information you're getting. You can ask
Mhm.
for other information, but the information that the guides are bringing forward is very much what that client needs in that moment.
Yeah. And that desire to know, like, that's the ego part, right?
Yes,
That's coming through, and we all have one that's held within our
exactly.
ego. But at some point you have to be like, this isn't
This is not
and
for me. This is
it's
for
not for
them.
me. Yeah, and that's the work. And yeah, so a lot of times I try not to keep, sessions in my head afterwards. I really try to be
Mhm,
like, put this, we talked about this a little beforehand, of just like, I'm
mhm.
going to put this over here because I don't want to be in your field. So, with this,
Yes.
I have a lot of detachment practices, but still, like, I don't,
Mhm.
anytime if I'm thinking about it, I'm pinging someone.
Yes. Mm.
And especially if I know that person in real life sometimes, right? I'm like, I
Mhm.
don't, I don't want to have this
I
active
don't want
in
any
me,
of that karma.
right? Yeah, you
Mhm.
keep yours, I'll keep mine. I'll
That's right.
shed what I need to shed, and we'll just keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, so that just thinking about trust, like I have heard you mention, because I listened to your podcast, that you are not like me, what we might call a natural born medium or psychic. It's some skills that we've had to develop over time. And my personal opinion is that we all have these skills and we develop them to whatever extent we develop them to. Some people would be professionals like us. Other people perhaps are just doing it, for fun and pleasure and, perhaps just as part of their personal growth. But can you talk a little bit about how you kind of evolved in your own trust of this information, specifically as a medical intuitive?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a process. And I think that I agree with you. I think everybody has these abilities. It's like how much we're able to develop them and tune into them. And I think, I grew up with a very I had just had to be very emotionally sensitive to my environment, and that made me more primed to be ready to receive information from the other side, because I was just already kind of turned up in that way. But I pushed a lot of this away for a long time. I spent a good part of my I kind of had my gifts awaken in my 20s, and then I spent a lot of time really being like, I'm just going to be normal, and then they would show up. And a lot of it is like, it's like when you actually say the weird thing and then people are like, I can't believe it, right? That's incredible. And I think that feedback is really important, right? It's the ego part, but it is also important feedback for development around that. But then I think really being within a community. I had a mentor and I joined her community, and being able to, and I did her program, and being able to practice a lot with people who were very open to whatever came
Mhm.
through,
Mm.
and to be like, well, that doesn't match, but like this does, right? And then to kind of be able to feel into what really, like, where that information was coming from, and which was coming from me, and what was coming from spirit and whatnot. And so being able to build that over time and feel what it felt like when I was getting information, it's like a certain, I don't know, it feels different, right, than when it's
Mhm.
coming from your brain.
Of course.
So to be able to hone that in, um I think was really key. But I think with a lot of the things that I did, there would be all these signs that it was supposed to be my path, and I would be like, no, might be like, that can't be right. There were several times when I'd be shown things by my guide and be like, I can't, that's I'm not special like that. And then it would keep happening to me, or other people would say it in sessions to me, and I'd be like, well, if this random person that doesn't know anything about me prior to
Yes.
this is also seeing and hearing the exact same things that I'm hearing, then I kind of have to tune into that. And so I had accepted the mediumship part, and then had a curiosity kind of about medical intuition, and I had all this, prior traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda training. So I was
Wow.
like, well, I'm curious about the body, and I'm a Virgo, and there's a lot of stuff with Virgo in the body, and
Of
it just kind of
course.
made sense
It's the
for me to think,
major,
yeah,
it's the major house in astrology, right?
right,
Virgo
yes,
rules
yeah.
health in so many different respects, so no surprise, right?
Yeah, and Virgos are really good about, giving advice that we're not always taking, right?
That's
It's
awesome.
hard to be in a body, and I
Yeah,
have, my own challenges with my body, right?
yeah.
But when I was starting to look into medical intuition, there was a medical intuition kind of meditation, like meet your medical intuition
Oh,
guide.
cool.
And I started to do that guy, that, and like, go in and then get in the meditation. And I'm like, I'm going to meet this guide and
Yeah.
everything. And I look around, and there are thousands
Wow.
of guides that showed up just like that. And they're like, we're here for you. And I was like, nope,
This can't be right.
that can't be right. And I just like get out of the meditation and then I'm like, I'm gonna do it again. And then I
Yeah.
do it again and they're like still there. And I'm like, okay, all right, like this is a thing. So
Wow. Of
it was that was a big and of course, this is all happening internally. So that is a
course.
level of self-trust that has to
Mhm.
be, at some point I just have to be
Nurtured.
like, I have to believe that these things are actually happening to me.
Yes.
I'm getting validated in the external world to a certain extent, but like, it's I still have to kind of trust, and that's, and my husband has done many like leaps of faith with me that
Yes.
I appreciate for him. Um, I think he still, he doesn't know all of the things that I experience, but he's along for the ride, which is good. Um, but it's, and it's still even now, I think, I don't know if this happens with you, but then like I'll get kind of a new level of information sometimes where I like will up
Yes.
level, and then that is a whole other like self-trust. Again, right?
And
This was,
learning, right?
yeah,
It's you made
yeah,
such a good point when we were kind of like in our little pre-chat, but it's like reading the information is one thing, and then learning how to actually share and express it and communicate with your client is a whole other ball game, right? So it's like maybe they've opened up this new awareness where they're sharing the information, and then you've got to navigate how am I going to incorporate cord removal into, my sessions in a way that people feel like held and supported, and
yeah.
reminding them that the energy that goes back to the person is really just about strengthening them. It's not about taking anything away, right? As an example.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think with sharing information, I think it's like it can be such a delicate process
Hmm.
too, because, you know, I try to do a lot of study around like being trauma informed with sharing my information, because
Hmm.
a lot of times what I'm seeing in the body is trauma.
Yeah.
I've seen things with, assault in the womb space, right?
Hmm.
And like
Hmm.
having to bring that up in a delicate way of being like,
Yes.
I'm seeing this energy, like let's unpack this, and
Hmm.
trying to understand how open that person is to, and how much they're, and that's something that's beautiful about the way that I do the healings is I actually never need to know the details. Like we
Hmm.
often will unpack the context around it,
Hmm.
but I don't need to know all the information as long as that person understands what it is that we're working on. And I really emphasize my role as being like a guide over this person that's healing you, right? And
Yes. Yes.
I'm a little
Amen.
uncomfortable with the word healer. Yeah. Healer
Amen.
as a word like
Yeah.
triggers me a little bit, even though,
Yeah.
that's the role that I play, because I don't want to take that autonomy away from somebody. I think we all have the power to heal ourselves. We just don't always have the tools or the information to do it. And so, I'm always like, I'm guiding, and that's why I want to teach more and do more courses as well, so that people have this information to be able to kind of, in the moment when things are triggering them, they can be like, oh, where is this in my body? How can I work with this energy? How can I release it? Um, because that's, and build their own self-trust with their body and their own feedback, communication that they're having. Because again, I've trained Reiki and I've done the emotion code and some other things. And that part of like, I am doing this to you
Yes.
never felt 100% right to me.
Hmm.
The back and forth is really, I think, where a lot of the healing happens. And I never want to create like dependency where somebody feels like they have to, sometimes with mediumship clients, I have somebody that, wants to come like 3 or 4 times a year
Hmm.
anytime something happens in their life and they need
Hmm.
like guidance, and I'm like, I have limit at some point, if they come too often, I'm gonna be like, we're gonna space these out a little bit more.
Hmm.
I don't want you need, part of this is that I'm empowering you to make your own decisions and trust your
Hmm.
own guidance and information. um
Yeah, and that's a big one. And I don't think, for me, it's always a red flag when, people, you can see on social media, you can see some of the ways that people are talking about the work that they do. And it's like, I didn't heal that person, right? Or that person wouldn't have been healed if it wasn't for my work, right? And like,
Right.
who in this life or in any other lifetime wants to take on that karma or that responsibility for saying like, the onus is on me. No, the onus is on you to figure this out, to sort this out, to unpack it. I'm here to provide the wisdom, the information, the support in any way possible. But at the end of the day, like you get to choose how that information fits into what you know about yourself, what you're learning about yourself. Because I feel like it's very much just a process of kind of like clearing energies, from this lifetime, from other lifetimes, and also just clearing, some of the layers and some of the stuckness, right? You mentioned this
Yeah.
idea of like, assaults involving the womb space, right? It's like that, kind of just thinking about it from a trauma perspective, it's like it can be trauma to one person. And then to the other person, that might not be trauma. It might not be something that's still triggering them and causing a physical issue in the body, right? So you're identifying the issue, but then you're also, kind of mindful of this is still having an ongoing impact on the body, which is really important, right? It's like we can't determine what something is important or not for someone's healing. And it goes
Right.
along the lines of like, I'm providing the information, the support, the wisdom, whatever you need, and being mindful of the fact that, people still have to be committed to their own healing process, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. And you spoke about like we a little bit about trust and trusting self and also trusting spirit. And I think like the and trusting the body, like that they're revealing the right information for that
Mm-hmm.
person to work on at that
Mm-hmm.
level is something that, like that's part of my intention setting before sessions is like
Yes.
I want to get the information that they're going to be able to action on right now, that they're going
Mm-hmm.
to that's where they're at. We need to go 5 steps ahead. They'll get there, right? It's more about kind of like removing any of the things that are keeping them from that journey that they're going on themselves. It's leading the horse to the water
Yeah.
that they can drink themselves, right?
And part of
When they're
that's the
ready.
emotional piece, right? Like, I think
Hmm.
people sometimes underestimate what an impact emotional stress can have on the body, right? Like the stress itself can be the trigger, it can be the thing that's keeping, maybe it's not the fibro, maybe it is, maybe it's not,
Yeah.
maybe it's, especially in chronic conditions, the emotions are kind of holding things in place that we might not even realize.
Yeah. And, as you're talking about that too, like especially with chronic conditions, there's so much with the Western medicine system around people not getting heard and acknowledged
Yes.
within that process and the trauma that creates
Yes.
impact, like can kind of deepening their experience of because those all of those symptoms they're having, that's the body trying to yell about something that is going
Exactly.
on in their system. And then the more they get silenced and dismissed, that's going to get louder and louder,
Yeah.
because it's
And
not, yeah.
in the homeopathy world, we talk about this idea of suppression, right? So it's this idea of using drugs to suppress the symptoms that the body is just naturally manifesting. And you go to enough doctors and you're not only suppressing it, you're not able to speak what's really going on, but then you start suppressing it with whatever treatments that may or may not be actually addressing the root cause. And that, that's huge, right? Like you said, that emotional piece. And then people develop medical trauma, right? So then they're nervous to go to the doctor and they're nervous to kind of seek out alternatives that may be of benefit to them. And then of course, that's a whole other cycle piece, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
think there's a way, I don't know, this is just like my, very forward thinking perspective, but do you think there's a way for doctors and medical intuitives to work together to
I
support their
hope
clients?
so. I see that happening a little bit. There's Carolyn Miss, she wrote the all the books on like the anatomy of spirit, and she's a medical intuitive, and a lot of her training as a medical intuitive was she was good at insights, and then she would talk to a doctor. A doctor would call
Mm,
her with like
mm,
she would just say like the name of he would say like name of the patient and like the age,
yeah.
and then she would say all this stuff back to him, and that was like part of and then he'd be like great thanks, and he'd like hang up the phone, and then like a month later he'd call and be like this patient, right? And I think I'd love to see that's where this is going. I think
Yeah.
a lot more medical professionals are more open to it than they were even 5 years ago. And I think I'd love to see this as, it's a piece of the diagnostic picture rather than, it's not either or, it is yes and
Yes.
with it.
Especially for
And
complex chronic cases, right? If you're at the end of your rope where the client is just not responding to anything, like what do you have to lose than to ask someone who may have access to information that perhaps is beyond your awareness and your understanding. And to be honest, it's beyond our awareness and understanding sometimes, right? We're really just the messengers providing this information, but
yeah.
it makes for a really beautiful relationship if you can have the 3D world kind of like mushed up against the 5D world and all of
And
these pieces.
it's tricky too because I think I don't know if I believe everything can be healed in this lifetime, right? I think, some people are coming here to have a certain experience in their body, and sometimes that relates to having a certain illness or a certain physical limitation or whatnot. And that's a really hard thing for people to work with. And as somebody that wants to help everybody, right? To like be like, okay, that's just part of your, I don't usually tell people that, right? But it
Yep.
becomes clear through our conversations like that.
Mhm.
And that's something they've come to believe too, that like that's sometimes that's just part of it is uh, coming to the acceptance point with your body. And you can definitely like manage it and make yourself feel better. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's a tricky part is
I was going to say that's
that's the
probably
karma part.
that is a hard part, but at least you can still, you are still accessing information on a level that, perhaps they've never considered or they've never looked
Yeah.
at before. And that it's like you can still be doing all of those things in support of your health. Maybe there are specific drugs, things that are going to help manage the symptoms so that you can still have a good quality of life. And maybe, there's you know, a, a modality, an option, something in there where you're like, but adding this would really support your mental health and well-being. And then you can still have the best quality of life possible in this
Yeah,
lifetime.
absolutely. And I think we can't discount the power of like the witnessing of like for me to just
Mm,
reflect back, I see these things in
mm,
you that you've probably been talking about for a long time that nobody else has acknowledged, right? And that is so just the witnessing is so powerful people for people to say this is real, and
mhm.
like that can be its own medicine, within it as well. But it's the body is layered and complex, as we all are.
Ain't that the truth? And I think that the more kind of like health issues that someone has had, like they really start to dive into this kind of knowing that it's like the body might be responding to something completely different. And I'm going through my own health challenge right now where I'm like, I think this is the root cause, but what's kind of like downstream a little bit is something completely different. And it
Mhm.
relates to an emotional pattern, something I'm not recognizing. So it's like now that I have that awareness, it can kind of like turn on some of the lights and maybe the body's like, she finally gets it. Okay, we can heal this physical manifestation of something that no longer needs to be here in this present moment. So
Yeah.
it's just like moving toward a sense of peace. Like you said, after sessions, people feel so much more at peace. They probably feel so much more grounded. Like you said, they feel so much more heard than they ever have before because they're being seen on a totally different level.
Yeah. Yeah, and oftentimes, it's a lot about shifting those base belief patterns that we have about ourselves that get
Hmm.
created during
Hmm.
some period of time. And
Hmm.
then once that belief system is kind of lifted off, and then we can re-examine our relationship to things, and that can be over time, right? We
Hmm.
can kind of re-look at that relationship or that situation and react differently in the moment. Um, yeah, and to your point, I think it's always like when somebody is like, there's somebody coming in like I was healed in one session.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not really how this works. Like it's layers, right? We're peeling
Yeah.
back layers, and there's always more layers to peel back, right? It's
So,
sometimes we can
especially as we
feel
get older, right? It's like
yeah,
what, we might have been affected by in our 20s is not the same
yeah,
things that are affecting us in our 40s, 50s and beyond. And
yeah,
that
totally.
that is a whole other awareness that we're coming to here as I see perimenopause on all the social media notices and I'm like I'm not there yet. I don't think.
And
And there
I've been thinking about a lot as, I'm starting to like knock on the door of that phase as well. And
yeah.
like, I'm sorry, and everything that's going on in the world, I'm starting to be like, how much of our perimenopause and
Yes.
menopause symptoms are like all of this suppressed rage that
Yes.
women have held and the cortisol in our bodies that
Yes.
we get to this point where some of these hormones kind of drop off and then suddenly all these things flare up because they're not being kind of like muted by
Yes. And
this
I
thing and all these feelings come up, right?
And I add a toxic world on that. Like what
Yeah.
we are maybe mistaking as perimenopause is actually just the fact that we are literally being poisoned at all levels at all times. And it's, it's just
Microplastics.
exact. Yeah, everything literally. It's like, what are we cooking in? What are we, what are we being subject to at the grocery store? Like that's a whole other conversation in its half. But
Yeah.
we did mention this idea of like symptoms, and I see symptoms definitely as the language of the body. It's the way that the body is communicating. And I wanted to chat a little bit about a course that you have coming up because that is beyond one-on-one sessions with you. I feel like that's a really good way that people can get a sense of your teaching and maybe have a little piece where they're a little bit more empowered to start making changes for themselves too. And I just wonder if you want to mention your course and chat a little bit about what it is and what people can expect.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the waitlist open now for my course, The Language of the Body. And so this is going to be a 6 week course on kind of walking through how to read information from your own body, kind of some
Mm.
intuitive guidance on how to access intuition in that way. And then, talking through the different organ systems and how they, communicate various things, teaching the techniques that I use within sessions so that, within the moment, if you're feeling something come up, you can be like, oh, I have a tool for this. I have an arrow in my quiver and I
Mm-hmm.
can, deal with this. Because that's always some of the most powerful healing for myself is just being like, oh, I'm being triggered in this way. I wonder what this is related to. Oh, this is related to this childhood experience that I had. Okay, now I can, reintegrate that part of myself, in the moment. Um, and then, kind of giving them tools for integrating afterwards as well and kind of how to move forward with that work. So I'm really excited about, yeah, again, empowering. I want everybody to have this information,
Yes.
so empowering as many people as I can to have that, ownership of their body and that really and create that conversation. Yeah, I can sign up now for the wait list for that. And then I'll be launching some specific dates later on.
Yay. Yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes for sure. And if people want to find this course or find even one-on-one sessions with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website is wisewoman.com, so WEISZ woman at .com. And then there's some links to my email and social on the website as well, but you can find me on Instagram, wise.woman. I'm on Threads as well with the same handle. So
I love it. And that's how we connected, actually, was threads. So how funny is that?
yeah.
And I want to ask you one last question, if you will allow me to, is as a medical intuitive and as a psychic medium, where do you see the future of health and healthcare going?
Yeah, I see I really see that more doctors are being curious about these things. I also see that medical care is so expensive
Mhm.
that I think that might be actually be a driver long term of,
Mm.
just trying to get some of the costs down by like being able to catch these things sooner and do more preventative care. And
Mhm.
so that might be, a way to get some of these institutions to be a little bit more on board is that it's, a little bit more effective. But I think the more that, these things are talked about in the public sphere, there's the podcast, the telepathy tapes is very popular. Like
Mhm.
it was one of the number one Apple podcasts
Wow.
out there, which tells me that the general public
Demand
is
for,
ready for
yes.
this. They're
Hmm.
hungry for it, and it's
Hmm.
even me talking about this work this year versus even several years ago. People are like, "Oh, wow, okay, I understand what that is," right? In a way that I think hasn't always been there, but um, I would love in the future also to do more. I'd love to work with some researchers and do studies on, what's happening in that experience when we're doing a session, what's going on in my brain, what's going
Yeah.
on in the person's brain, as they're walking through these releases and kind of what that looks like, to get some data on it because, um, yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and then the science aspect can meet intuition really for the best marriage, so
Yeah.
that there is the data validation that a lot of people are seeking when they're doing this work.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And then we can use that even to get even more biofeedback, right? And to the
Hmm.
actual work itself. I use muscle testing as a biofeedback tool when I'm working as kind of a
Hmm.
yes, no response. And, I kind of makes me wonder how else we could be using that
Yeah.
with technology tools to give us biofeedback to get an even deeper level. So yeah, I see lots of good things.
See, despite what people say, the future is bright.
Yes.
We definitely
I
feel it
believe
is.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to be an optimist or I'll
Yes,
just,
exactly. Exactly. And in the work that we do, like you always are seeing kind of,
Yeah.
there's an expression that Spirit gave me many years ago, but it was like there's always a light at the end of the tunnel when you're facing the right direction, right? And it's a good
Mm,
reminder. It's like if our perspective, our kind of where our focus is not what we're supposed to be focusing on, because of course attention has a big impact on that, then yeah, it can have a dramatic impact on our health, our well-being, physical, mental, emotional, every single level that we're talking about here.
Yeah. And I can imagine like being in the Akashic all the time, right? The overarching perspective that they have,
Mhm.
up there
Mhm.
is
It's like
kind
you're
of
just
just,
facing the wrong
you know,
direction. Just turn around,
yeah.
look the other way.
Right. It's like you're worried about this like
That's
lifetime right
right.
here, but really there's so much more happening and I can see for miles ahead, right? And so that's its own kind of comfort.
And it's kind of a joke, right? It's like it's the human self versus the soul self, right? It's like the human self just wants to know how to feel better. The soul
Mhm.
self is like, this is all for your highest and best good. And you'll figure it
Yeah.
out as stressful and as
Yeah.
annoying as it is right now. And
The
it's like,
human self is like, am I going to get that job? And the soul
yes.
self is like, you don't want that job anyways.
Or there's a better one around the corner, right? It's this perspective. It's like,
Yeah.
that's actually not the job for you.
Right. There's so much more. Like you're
Yeah. Higher
you're not going to
perspective
get
for
that because
sure.
there's this. Yeah.
And that's the wisdom that you get from your guides versus always trying to do everything on our own too, because
Mhm.
that shared sense of, having a common practice is really important too, that relationship with your guides. And hopefully we'll talk more about that maybe on a future episode. Would be cool to dive into
Yeah.
that, especially as you mentioned your medical intuitive guides. I'd love to hear more about that. So,
Absolutely. And I have some future coursework planned around spirit guide kind of boot camp, shall
yay,
we say,
yay. I love
for
it.
future, but that's still in the partly in the ether. So
Yeah.
that'll be coming later. So
I love
follow
it.
along.
I'm ready for the boot camp. I'm definitely ready for the boot camp. And you can definitely follow Laura on social media and on her website. And I'm just so grateful that you wanted to have this chat with me. And I feel like it's really helpful. It's really empowering. It's going to give people a lot of things to think about that maybe they've heard before, or maybe these are brand new concepts to them. So it'll be the
Absolutely.
best
Thank
way
you
to
so
share.
much for having me on, and it's absolute pleasure to chat with you. We can
Yay, thank you
we
so
can
much.
talk for hours, I think.
I we probably would. We probably
Yeah.
would. Love that so much. Well, it's great to see you, and I will see you again soon. And hopefully, everyone will tune in and follow you where all the social media channels are.
Beautiful. Thank you.